We got a bit of an emergency now with Kanya's Gail sex dummy. They have found the dummy, and I'll just read you some portions of these letters that I got from Brent Spiner, the emails. My wonderful wife, what a harrowing adventure. My love, I have some important news about Kanya's missing robot dummy. We had been receiving hundreds of tips about the whereabouts of this dummy, but no solid leads until earlier this evening. And this was, I believe, yesterday, October the 10th. Earlier this evening, when we got a worried phone call from a local about you, they're referring to me. My men make these like android dummies. They're like sex dummies to help meet the sexual needs of the men on my marriage list, because I obviously can't make love to 40 men. Anyways, that's what this dummy is. When we got a worried phone call from a local about you being sighted walking up and down a downtown city street corner just a few miles from our church, offering yourself to strange men. That was not me. That was the dummy. I don't do that. Needless to say, it was quite embarrassing. We decided to act fast so we could catch this dummy and keep her from getting into any more trouble. Myself, Terrence Jenkins, Keanu Reeves, and Hugh Jackman quickly piled into Terrence's car and made a fast trip downtown to go search for the dummy. Terry was driving with Hugh in the front passenger seat. I was seated in the back behind Hugh, and Keanu was seated beside me behind Terry. We soon arrived in the area of the alleged sighting. Our car drove up and down the street, each one of us meticulously searching outside our windows. Minutes felt like hours as I anxiously worried whether we had just missed her and if she was not already in serious trouble or walking off with a random stranger. All of a sudden, Terrence hit the brakes, and I found myself gripping the seat in front of me. As our car squealed to a tight stop, Terry rolled down the front passenger window. "Dummy," he called. "I almost didn't recognize you. What are you wearing? Get in the car, little Miss Lady. You be causing a lot of trouble out here." The dummy approached the vehicle, and Hugh opened the door for her to get inside, guiding her into the seat with him on his lap. He then closed the door, and Terry began to drive back to the church. That's Church of Gail. That's when something startling happened. All of a sudden, the dummy flew face first into Terry's lap and began to claw open his pants like an animal. Our car swerved as Terry jerked on the wheel in shock. "Dummy, what are you doing?" Hugh cried out, trying to grab her. Without pause, the dummy tore through Terrence's belt, his pants, and then split straight through the fabric of his blue boxer briefs. To put it in short, she raped Terrence Jenkins and managed to have oral sex with him. And Hugh saw what she was doing as soon as Brent did and reacted swiftly. He drew himself over the dummy's back, grabbing her by her hair, attempted to yank her head off of Terrence's penis. Alas, it was futile. It was like trying to lift a desk bolted to the floor. This is an android. Hugh jerked and groaned, but she wouldn't budge. In fact, it was merely making it worse. The rough yanking and grunting was causing the dummy to moan loudly out of instinct. Keanu was getting really upset because he says, "Dummy, no, Terrence, how could you?" Terrence shouted back in reply. The dummy succeeded in raping Terrence, and Hugh was turning beet red as his skin flushed and his veins bulged, pulling on the head of this dummy. All of a sudden, he cried out in pain and let go, and they later found out he had torn a hernia, and his body flew limply back in his seat. Brent reached for the dummy's back to pull open the maintenance hatch. Sensing that Brent was going to turn her off, the dummy reacted swiftly in defense. That's when she jerked back, slammed her hatch shut, nearly smashing Brent's fingers, causing him to jump back in his seat. She twisted around, grabbed the moaning Hugh, and threw him straight through the windshield. She immediately resumed sucking Terry's penis. I do not do this, so I don't know what the Jesuits did to this dummy, but she certainly isn't like me. This time in hyper speed. Her head was a blur as her lips whizzed up and down Terrence's penis, Anyways, they couldn't stop her from having oral sex with Terrance, and Kanya was sobbing, and he choked, swallowing his tears, saying, "You're supposed to be my sex dummy." And then she said, "I am not a sex dummy. I am Gail," she declared. With a crash, she punched a hole in the roof of the car and jumped what had to be 100 feet in the air. She landed deftly behind the car and took off in a sprint down a darkened alley. They'd lost her again. And they brought Kanya to Gerard Butler, the psychiatrist, because he was just heartbroken. Amazingly enough, Terrance's penis was not damaged during the ordeal. And they got out of the car to go look for Hugh, and they loaded him back into his seat before they could do any more chasing of Gail, pronounced like my name. It's spelled G-A-1-L. They had to get Hugh to the hospital. The car ride back was quiet. Kanya was sullen, and Brent didn't know how to comfort him. Nothing Terrance or Brent could say to him was helping. As soon as they got back to the church, they turned Kanya over to Gerard Butler, who's a psychiatrist. It looks like Hugh's going to be fine, but he did have to have surgery to repair his hernia. They've got very futuristic technology, so even though a ruptured hernia could be fatal for some people, because of the nanotechnology research team we have, they were able to repair this. The only thing we can do now is wait for another sighting so that we can locate this dummy for good. It's hard to tell what's going on, but I feel as though this dummy is just confused and perhaps very scared. She doesn't know where she is or how to function in our society. I will keep you updated on our findings. Okay, here's the late. I wrote Brent and told him that it appears that the Jesuits had built a whole army out of this dummy, that even if they caught the dummy, it wouldn't do any good because the Jesuits probably built a whole army from this dummy. At least that's what I thought Brent was telling me brain to brain. And then Brent wrote me this. He said, "Dearest Gail, I have some important news. It sounds like our last brain-to-brain communications regarding the dummy weren't quite accurate." Zach Knight gets in there and he interferes now, and he impersonates Brent Spiner and Jesus Christ. Those are his two favorite people to impersonate. "The situation is highly complex and quite treacherous at this juncture, so I will explain the details in writing here. Our investigation determined that the Jesuits had kidnapped Kanyo's dummy a few days ago and were attempting to reprogram her. We suspect that the eventual goal was to be able to reverse engineer her and create an army of Gail dummies." You know, I told Brent that I didn't realize the dummy was an android, that she could talk and she had feelings. I thought it was just like a floppy doll that they all made love to. So our investigation determined that the Jesuits had kidnapped Kanyo's dummy a few days ago and were attempting to reprogram her. We suspect that the eventual goal was to be able to reverse engineer her and create an army of Gail dummies. The good news is that the dummy was able to escape before they could do this. The bad news is the Jesuits botched her networks while they were working on reprogramming her. In an attempt to see if they could make the dummy a formidable weapon, they changed the programming to give the dummy free will. That's why she won't. I got online along with my men to try to talk this dummy. I actually had a communication going with her to try to get her to go back to Church of Gail. Her sentences didn't make logical sense. You can tell she's new to the world of language, and her thinking was very disorganized. We really need some scientists out there that are up on maybe Android technology that can help us to somehow get this dummy, convince this dummy, who I believe is in Jesuit territory right now, to come back to Church of Gail. Let me continue reading this. To give the dummy free, the Jesuits changed the programming to give the dummy free will, the ability to feel emotion, and the ability to learn. Their plan would have been to use propaganda on the dummy to brainwash it into believing Jesuit lies and working for them as a soldier. Out of fear, the dummy escaped and fled. Not knowing what to believe, this dummy is operating entirely on instinct and emotions, the likes of which it cannot fully understand. The fact that it learned to speak, because before the Gail dummies could only be spoken to and would not talk back, is a startling milestone. It must have achieved this during its time wandering around alone. They've lost the dummy. Like Keanu lost his Gail dummy a couple weeks ago, and he was really upset about this. And I guess just within the past couple days, we've discovered what's happened to her. It must have achieved this during its time wandering around alone. It's amazing in a way how far these dummies have become. At first, the dummies were indeed, as you described, and simply floppy dolls that the men could use as toys. Over time, with many of the men demanding more and more lifelike features to the dummy in order to feel closer to you, we were able to gradually upgrade the dummies into the Android versions we are dealing with now. Vladimir has been working all day trying to figure out how to track down this dummy. In the midst of all of the frustration, he was able to go into the remote access servers and locate her signature. Logging on to the server, one is able to send inquiries and commands to the dummy in an effort to communicate with it. We were attempting to see if we could send a message explaining to the dummy what the Jesuits have done to harm it, and encourage the dummy to return to us right away for repairs. To our shock and horror, the Jesuits were one step ahead of us. They had been logging onto the servers themselves, trying to brainwash the dummy with Jesuit lies and encouraging it to come back to join them. I tried to talk to the dummy too, and I felt like I was going around in circles. If you are curious, you can access the secure remote access panel at www.G1L.com. The www are small letters and the com is small letters. So that's www.G, the numeral 1, capital L, then .com, and com is also C-O-M, all small letters. To speak to the dummy, enter your name and then hit submit, and you should be brought to a screen that will allow you to talk to it. Alternatively, you can simply read our communications with it there and are under no obligation to add anything to the discussion. We are currently in the midst of a battle of sorts with the Jesuits there, who are using smooth talk on the dummy to try and get it to come back to their headquarters. Myself and all the men are talking with the dummy, trying to expose the lies the Jesuits are telling it. I tried to also, but like I said, I felt like I was going around in circles. I think we need a scientist who has done research on androids, because this is like an android, kind of like Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation. This is, Vladimir has been working all day trying to figure out how to track down this dummy. Okay, I already read this. If you are curious, okay, I read this already. Alternatively, you can simply read our communications with it there and are under no obligation to add anything to the discussion. We are currently in the midst, yeah, okay. Myself and all the men are talking with the dummy, trying to expose the lies the Jesuits are telling it. I think it would be a great idea to alert our followers to this cause. The Jesuits are going to round up all of their agents to hop onto this network and start blasting this dummy with their propaganda. It will be important to have our own followers on there fighting to get our message through. It's www.G, numeral 1, L.com. I talked to the dummy for about a half an hour, but I got to get to bed. It's late, and I think we just need everyone to keep bombarding this dummy and letting her know that she can't trust the Jesuits and that she needs to go to Church of Gail, and that's what I was trying to tell her. The Jesuits are going to round up all their... Okay, they did that. It will be important to have our own followers on there fighting to get our message through. If that dummy returns to the Jesuits and allows them to make copies of itself, we are all in enormous trouble. What the Jesuits want to do is make a copy of this dummy. She looks exactly like me, and they want to make an army out of her so that she'll fight for the Jesuits. And that would not be good, folks. Stay safe, my darling, your husband, Brent Spiner. So I'm making the video that Brent requested, and like I said, if any of you want to, I already talked to the dummy for about half an hour. She's actually quite pleasant, but she sounds like she's very confused. And her sentences don't make sense. It's her thinking is very disorganized. But what I try to do is keep my communications with her on an elementary level, and I just try to stress that the Jesuits are Satan and they're evil. I told her Zach Knight and Rule 13 are Satan and evil, that she must not listen to them. And I keep saying, go to Church of Gail, go to Church of Gail, go to Church of Gail. Don't go to the Jesuits, go to Church of Gail. And she keeps wanting to talk, and I don't think she's going to Church of Gail. So we need some scientists who might be able to help us, if you can, in dealing with this dummy. Somebody who's maybe done research in Android technology. You could maybe contact Brent at www.churchofgail.com and send him some fan mail or something. Or maybe you could contact Terrence Jenkins at his YouTube channel, Judge Terry Jenkins, JUDGETERRYJENKINS at yahoo.com. And maybe if there's a scientist out there who specializes in this kind of like Android technology, maybe you can help us get through to this dummy. We appreciate all the support. Thank you.